Extracurricular activities. Part 6. Average person gets kidnapped 3 times a year. Factoid actually just statistical error. By ohshiddlesticks. Read by My Lost and Found. Summary. Midoriya Izuku just sort of assumed that everyone else got kidnapped at least once a year, and his once or twice a month ordeals were just a little more than normal. Bakugou gets kidnapped, and Izuku is surprised that nobody else knows what to do. It's a normal childhood occurrence, right? Midoriya was pretty sure that he tended to get kidnapped more than most other people, but he didn't exactly have a good reference point for how often the average person got kidnapped. He'd read an article in his 4th year of primary school that talked about the issue that Japan had with human trafficking, so he just sort of assumed everyone got kidnapped at least once a year, and his once or twice a month ordeals were just a little more than normal. Most of the time he was kidnapped, it was by quirkless traffickers. He'd been rounded up in a room with a whole bunch of other people like him, and they'd been tied up, usually not very securely, guarded by only a few grunts who never expected their captives to fight back. Escaping was fairly easy. But other times, the kidnappers seemed overly prepared, watching him like he was some sort of nuclear weapon, not a weak, quirkless boy. Sometimes these groups would take Kachan along with him, so Izuku knew they weren't kidnapping him for his lack of quirk. These schemes didn't happen often, but when they did, they were a much bigger issue. They'd truss up the 2 boys like highly volatile turkeys and shut them into secure holding cells. Izuku had only managed to escape the first one of these with Kachan's help, and ever since, he had brought tools with him to aid in freeing himself. Kachan and him had developed a strange relationship over the years. It was hard not to form a strong bond with someone he'd been kidnapped with 18 times. 23 if you count the times they'd been taken by the same group, but had been held and escaped separately. But Kachan hated Izuku for being a quirkless liability. He still never purposely left Izuku behind, though, and they'd gotten matching tracker implants together for Izuku's 12th birthday, so they could send emergency SOS to the other's phone if needed. So, when Izuku woke up in a hospital, 2 arms wrapped in casts, and knew that Kachan had been taken, he flipped out a little. "I need my phone, right now," he told the doctor, who was explaining to him the extent of damage to his hands. Izuku couldn't hear him over the ringing in his ears, anyway. "Kids these days," the man muttered. "I'm going to cut the casts off with a small saw first. Try not to move. You can have your phone after that." Izuku tapped his foot impatiently, trying not to twitch at the loud noise of the saw turning on. He watched as it cut through the plaster, which then cracked off his arm using another instrument. He still couldn't move as the second one was taken off. But as soon as the plaster was off both arms, he was ripping off the padding underneath and lunging for where his phone sat on the side table next to a bag of clothes and some flowers. He turned it on and froze. "It's August 6th. "Yes," the doctor confirmed. "You slept through the 5th and most of today. Your friends are here to visit you, but I also want to point out that both our hospitals and UA have mental health and trauma resources. Don't send my friends in, please," Izuku begged. "I have to go." "Okay," the doctor agreed. "I'll just grab your papers and then you'll be set." The man turned around to get some sheets from the printer. By the time he looked back, Izuku was already out the window. Izuku knew the statistics. He knew he and Kachan were exceptions to this rule, that kidnappers wanted to keep them alive, yet beaten down. But he couldn't stop thinking about 3%. 3% of kidnapped kids don't make it home, dead or alive. Kachan wouldn't be one of them. He pulled up the tracking app in a secure browser, already headed down the street towards the nearest train station. Luckily, someone had packed a sweatshirt in the bag that he had grabbed from the side table, so he pulled the hood low over his face. It was better to be seen as a delinquent than to be caught. The tracker said Kachan was in Kamino Ward. Izuku had only been to Kamino a few times before, once on a trip, and maybe another 2 times when he'd been kidnapped before. The clock is ticking, he thought. It's almost been 2 days already. The longest that Izuku had ever gone missing was 6 days. For Kachan, it was 3. But it usually took them less than a day to escape, sometimes only a few minutes, and other times it was a couple of hours. Having Kachan for this long meant something was wrong. He paid the train fee and hopped into the late-night train, heading for Kamino, right as it entered the station. It was nearly silent in the car, aside from the rumble of the train on the tracks, and the obnoxious squeak of his thick-soled sneakers as he bounced his leg up and down, drawing nasty glares from the other commuters. He refreshed his browser over and over, watching his mark on the GPS draw closer and closer to the point that Kachan's tracker was pinging. He couldn't help but remember the train on the way to Hosu, the same nervous energy building in his gut. The station he got off was only 2 blocks away from Kachan, and he pulled his hood even lower, slumping his shoulders and hopefully blending in with the delinquents and ne'er-do-wells that haunted the well-lit spaces under the tracks. He set out to find him. He kept an eye out for people who looked just slightly out of place, ones that walked with a certain spring in their step that Izuku had come to recognize symbolized a villain, someone that believed they were an important piece of the world than all the other people in the street. There were none. Now, this wasn't particularly strange. Oftentimes, groups would forgo an active patrol around the perimeter if they had eyes on the streets and back alleys from the buildings. Izuku remembered one specific kidnapping where he had been graced by a bullet from a sniper perched on top the roof of the building he was running from. There was nobody watching from the buildings. Occasionally, but rarely, the only guard was standing in front of the building, like a bouncer. It was almost always a bad move by the villains, because they never seemed to expect someone to be breaking out from the inside, but less experienced groups were prone to doing it. But as Izuku drew closer to Kachan's location on the GPS, there was no figures guarding any doors. Izuku was brought back to his days of being kidnapped by quirkless traffickers. Sometimes, when the groups had obviously just started out, they would underestimate the people they were capturing. But many quirkless people had faced being kidnapped before, and they had learned from those experiences. If they could get out once, they could get out again. These groups would leave their quirkless captives in rooms without guards, usually unrestrained. Few, if any, of the exits would be blocked by anything substantial. Izuku had even been in a situation once where the kidnappers forgot to lock the door. So, maybe, just maybe, the League of Villains fit into that same brand of stupid. The building that Izuku reached was nondescript from the outside, with a single door being the only entrance on the first floor. There were windows higher up, though probably on the 2nd floor, so Izuku began climbing. He gripped the grooves of the mortared brick wall and slowly pulled himself up. His worries abated that the League was a competent group before he was climbing up the outside of their building, and they seemed to be none the wiser. But his discomfort still grew. There had to be something. His fingertips ached when he let go of one hand to grab his knife from the bag, jamming it into the thin space between 2 sides of the windows and popping open the latch. The right panel of the windows swung outwards towards him without touching it, and Izuku gripped the knife tighter, ready to fight, before he realized that it was just an old, crappy hinge. He climbed through. He scanned the room. There was a single, solid door. No windows aside from the one he had entered through. The vents were too small to climb through. The walls had once been white, but they had become a sickly yellow from smoke stains, and the only furniture was an overturned table. Izuku walked around the table hesitantly, waiting to be ambushed, until he saw Kachan? There was a lump on the floor, beaten and bloody, but still recognizable by his blonde hair. His hands were tied behind his back, palms pressed together. It was the usual way the kidnappers tied him, so that he'd have to blow a hand off first if he wanted to use his quirk to escape. He was breathing, if a little shallow, and his left eye was dark blue and puffed up to the size of a golf ball. Izuku slapped him across the face.
"Fuck you,"
Kacchan said, and bloody spit came flying at Izuku's face. He dodged it.
"Kacchan, wake up," Izuku whispered. "Oi, is that you, nerd?"
"Yeah, we have to get out of here. I don't like what's going on."
"Me neither, dumbass."
"No, not like that," Izuku explained, while sawing away at the ropes binding Kacchan's hands. "They're either really shitty kidnappers or they're playing the long con. Either way, we need to get out." Kacchan sighed, massaging his newly freed wrists.
"Managed to piss off the emo asshole, so he threw me in here. But I must have passed out before I could do shit. As far as the villains, I think they're just fucking amateurs. They're dumb and reactionary, and they all have daddy issues."
"Let's just get out while we can," Izuku murmured, still on edge. Izuku led their way out of the window and down the wall. When Kacchan's grip gave out halfway through, he caught his arms so he didn't crash to the ground.
"Didn't need your help. Could have gotten out this whole place by myself,"
Kacchan told him. "Okay," Izuku agreed, like he was talking to a 12-year-old who thought they knew everything. Kacchan grumbled, but didn't respond. They walked several blocks in silence, trying to move away from the building and train station. It's where villains would look for them first in any normal escape attempt. The air around them was still, anticipating something, but it was going to be something bigger than the two of them. So Izuku's fear rested over him like a thin blanket rather than a smothering weight. Kacchan began to stumble not too long after, though he would never admit it, so Izuku moved them into an alleyway off the bigger street. "The heroes are on your case already, so we should call Aizawa-sensei to update him." Kacchan collapsed onto the ground and rested his back against the rough brick side of a building. Izuku carefully ignored how weak and beat up he looked. They never really talked about any of their kidnappings after the fact, but Izuku knew it was nice to be in the company of someone who understood. Izuku pulled out his phone and called Aizawa, his second number on speed dial after his mother. It rang 3 times, and then the man picked up with a click.
"Problem child, please tell me you're not on the brink of death after jumping out a hospital window and running away during an ongoing investigation."
Izuku chuckled nervously. "I'm okay, but I went to go get Kacchan, and he needs some medical attention. Nothing urgent, but they did rough him up." Izuku dodged a half-hearted kick from Kacchan as Aizawa's incredulous voice came tiny from the speaker.
"You got Bakugou? Like you found him?"
"Yeah, the League's kidnapping scheme was really unprofessional. They even left him alone with no guards or alarms." The line crackled with static silence before Aizawa spoke up again.
"Where are you?"
"In Camino Ward, a few blocks east of the League's base. I can send you my GPS."
"Do that, and don't leave."
The tone of his teacher's voice left no room for argument. "Yes, sensei." Aizawa hung up. "Well, that was weirder than usual," Izuku commented. Izuku had never used a shock blanket before, but he had to admit he liked it. It crinkled as he sat in the back of a van that had been driven over from UA. A few of his friends sat in the back with him. Apparently, they had very nearly snuck out to go find Kacchan before Izuku had left, and they'd been put in ward of the hospital on a soft lockdown. Kacchan was sitting a few rows up, passed out against the window after a kiss from Recovery Girl. Izuku found himself checking on the other boy through the crack between the benches and the side of the van every few minutes. His nerves were always a little bit frayed after kidnappings. "So, How did you know where Bakugou was? Asked Uraraka after a short bout of silence. Oh, I have a tracker for him on my phone. He has one for me, too. We got them together for when this type of thing happens.
Don't you mean for if this type of thing happens?
Asked Kirishima with an awkward grin.
No?
Questioned Izuku.
Definitely when. It's been a little better since getting into UA, but there's always going to be kidnappers out there, right?
He laughed. No one else did. Deku, have you been kidnapped before? Asked Uraraka, slowly.
I mean, yeah. Hasn't everyone? Japan has a massive human trafficking problem.
When I was very young, a group attempted to ransom me because of my family, but I've never truly been kidnapped. Has anyone else? Asked Yaoyorozu. The van was silent.
Bro, how many times have you been kidnapped that you needed to get a tracker?
I lost track at about 100. Izuku whispered weakly.
What?
Came a hiss from the passenger seat of the van where Aizawa sat. At that moment, the van came to a stop at the UA parking lot, on the opposite side where hundreds of reporters were clamoring for comments.
It looks like it's time to go,
warbled Izuku, and he tugged open the door to the van with enough force that it bounced back before running for the main building. His shock blanket trailed behind him like a silver cape.
We will be discussing this. So,
Aizawa started, his fingers steeple in front of him on the table.
You said some pretty concerning things earlier on in the van.
Izuku, arms wrapped around himself with his shoulders slumped, opened his mouth to retort, then closed it. Aizawa glared at him, and he tried deflecting. Can't we wait until Kachan is here for this conversation? He's the one that actually got kidnapped this time.
This time,
Aizawa murmured, his face scrunched up like it had been sucking on a particularly sour lemon. But he acquiesced, and Izuku sat swinging his legs in the chair across from his teacher's desk for several long minutes, as Kachan was brought over from Recovery Girl's office. Kachan, Izuku called. You're doing better. Aizawa-sensei wants to talk about being kidnapped, though.
Yeah, no shit,
Kachan stated.
I mean, what? Your count has to be over 100 by now. That's not fucking normal.
Well, how was I supposed to know? Izuku grumbled. The internet says it's an epidemic in Japan, and nobody who's taken me has been that strange.
Haven't you noticed anything weird about these fuckers? I thought you were supposed to be observant, dumbass.
Well, the time travelers were weird, obviously, but I think we've established that weird things happen to me, Izuku argued.
Time travelers,
Aizawa sighed. Kachan cackled.
He's not actually bullshitting you on that one.
The first time that time travelers had been an issue for Izuku was when he was 10. Coincidentally, or not so, it was also the first time Kachan had been caught with him. What the fuck is going on? Kachan demanded, mouth just as dirty as a kid as it was as a teen. Deku, where are we? I don't know, Izuku said. His eyes were wide, searching around the small cell they were being held in. He tried to move, but he was immobilized completely by a steel contraption that had forced him to kneel, with his hands locked behind his back. We're moving, because the ground is rumbling like a truck, but there aren't any windows. At least we aren't on a boat. There aren't any visible rivets in this cell that I could take out, but maybe there's something on this thing I'm stuck in. Hey, Kachan, are you as tied up as I am? Because if you can reach it, there's a screwdriver and 2 knives in the soles of my shoes. I hollowed them out. Are you trying to trick me somehow, Deku? I told you to tell me where we are. I didn't do anything. I don't know why they took both of us. Usually it's just me and a lot of other quirkless people when this happens. So I don't know where we're going, which means we should get out. Fast. I bet I would already be out of here if you weren't here. Kacchan blustered, but the slight shake in his voice gave him away. He walked into Izuku's line of sight. Okay. His hands were bound in metal capsules, but they weren't riveted shut, and they were his only confinement. Kacchan, could you stick your hand in the little space underneath my armpit? I want to try something. Gross, Deku! Kacchan responded, but he did it anyway. Izuku wrenched his body hard to the right, and the part of the contraption that his arms were attached to swung down, cracking the restraint open with a sickening squeal of metal colliding. Kacchan let out a small yelp, but disguised it as a grunt. What the fuck? Warn me next time. Do it again. I'll break the other one. Fuck you. In another 30 seconds, both of Kacchan's hands were free, and Izuku was confident that he'd have a deep line of bruising spanning the right side within the next few days. You can grab the screwdriver now and take this thing apart. If you want, Izuku added cautiously, not wanting to raise the other boy's ire. Shut up, Deku. I'm going to be the best hero, and a hero wouldn't leave someone weak in the hands of villains. He grabbed the screwdriver into the nearest juncture, spinning it like he'd been trained to do such all his life. So cool, Izuku breathed, stars in his eyes. Once Izuku had been freed from his confines, they figured out that the easiest way to get out would be to pop open the back door of the trunk with a stream of carefully aimed explosions. And they stood on the ledge, preparing to jump off, then made eye contact and, Aizawa demanded, and Izuku smiled, as if the memory were a fond recollection. And we jumped. I got pretty bad road burn, but Kacchan's healed up really fast because of his quirk. It's really cool, actually. Did you know that the type of glycerin sweat his mom's side of the family produces practically erases scars? It's because of the... Deku. Yep. Shut up about my quirk. Oh, Izuku said meekly. Sorry. Anyway, we hitchhiked back and were in on time for school the next day, so it was fine. That is definitely not fine. But continue. How did you know they were time travelers? Izuku shifted in his seat. Well, we only found out for sure after they'd already kidnapped us a few times. It would have been the 5th, right? 4th, Kacchan corrected. The 5th was the shark pit. That was absolutely a pit of dolphins, and you know it. But yeah, the 4th time... What do you mean they're giving us 40 million yen total? We agreed on 50 for each of the boys. That's 60 million they're missing from the count. A voice was screaming into the phone, and it rang through the vents of the abandoned apartment complex that the duo was being held in. Izuku, having been crawling through those same vents, froze at how close the voice sounded. They were almost crawling directly above the man, so a single misstep would mean being heard. It's Ground Zero and Hero Deku. I'm sure we could find better buyers back in our time. You know, I don't usually work with the Yakuza, but some of them have bounties in the hundreds of millions. And they're so squishy right now as kids. The kidnapper laughed. You'd never expect that they're going to become the greatest heroes of the future when Deku's built like a twig and Ground Zero's hair makes him look like a dandelion. Izuku heard the faintest little affronted noise echo in the vents around him, and he tensed. But the kidnapper didn't seem to hear them. Oh, please, the man continued. Yamaguchi's quirk is one of the best time travel quirks out there. Nobody else is even going to be able to come back this far to nab him. Damn, that was 500 yen that Izuku owed Kacchan. He hadn't thought they'd actually been dealing with time travelers. The voice grew quieter as the man left the room, muffling the rest of the conversation. Izuku peered through the vent cover, and after making sure the coast was clear, pried it off. There are no windows in this room, he whispered. Let's get out. Kacchan dropped out of the vents behind him, sending up a cloud of dust as he landed gracefully on the floor. Izuku stifled a sneeze. After picking the window lock, they were home free. "You wouldn't call me Deku for a week after that," Izuku commented. "You were so upset that it was going to be my hero name." "You were quirkless," Kachan argued. "I thought if you became a hero, you would die. It wasn't like people hadn't already tried to kill you, and I can't be there for you all the time, dumbass." "Kachan?" Izuku warbled, eyes filling with tears. "You're so nice to me." Aizawa cleared his throat, loudly. "Boys? Quirkless?" Kachan's eyebrows raised at Izuku, and he felt that ingrained need to shrink back. "You haven't told him yet? It's been months since we started school." "It's not something I really advertise." Izuku drifted off. Kachan sighed. It wasn't Izuku's first time being kidnapped by quirkless traffickers since he was diagnosed at 4, but it was one of the first times he hadn't been able to escape before the real danger appeared. He'd seen this villainess on the TV before. Actually, Dr. Evil, truly a terrible name, was known for finding and researching interesting specimens, as she called them. People with complicated quirks, especially mutations and intelligence quirks. Then she compared them to the quirkless specimens. Though Izuku knew the woman's actions were horrible and unethical to the greatest extent, he couldn't help but wonder what her findings were. But now that he was one of the quirkless specimen, he disliked the concept far more. "Ah!" he shouted, as an electric shock seared through his body, blanking out his vision for a second. A similar cry echoed from the person strapped to the table beside him. Another shock, but this time the echo didn't come. "So boring," the villainess said, making a note on her clipboard. "People with aquatic mutations are so weak to electricity. It's only been half an hour and he's already passed out. Well, quirkless, I guess I'll see you in the morning. Our tests are going to be far more painful." Izuku shrugged as the door to the lab swung shut behind her. As soon as the click-clack of Dr. Evil's heeled boots were silenced by the door and distance, a weak voice piped up. The other person in the room, who was supposed to be passed out. "Hey, can you hear me?" Izuku nodded, then realized the owner of the voice couldn't see him. "Yeah," he whispered. The single word tore his already strained vocal cords. "Great. She hasn't realized my arms can stretch far enough to unlock myself. They're tentacles, by the way," the other captive clarified. "So I can unlock myself and then you, but you're gonna have to help carry me out here." Izuku let out a shaky breath and confirmed with a small, "Okay." Soon enough, his bounds had been popped open, and he was being lifted by a strong pair of arms. The skin was unnaturally smooth, like what he imagined an octopus's would feel like. But it was marred all over with dry patches, raised scars that must have been caused by a multitude of experiments. Izuku sat up and immediately felt the need to vomit. He held it in. He wasn't quite sure whether it was him or the octopus person who was holding more of their weight, but they were leaning heavily on each other as they made their way through the door, which was, thankfully, equipped with an automatic button. The doctor might have been evil, but at least she respected fire codes and wheelchair users. The red exit light glowed down the hallway as they began their journey. The facility was a labyrinth of white walls and linoleum floors, but after what felt like years, Izuku and his octopus partner reached a door that led out. Just as they neared their escape, a voice rang out from behind them. "Stop!" Dr. Evil called, and Izuku froze on instinct. "No, keep going. Run," his partner said. "I'll stall her. Get help." So Izuku ran on aching legs out the door of this facility and to the nearest emergency phone. In the aftermath, with heroes arriving to take down the villainess, he was ignored. His partner was hailed as a hero, sacrificing one of their tentacle arms to hold the doctor off until the pro-heroes arrived. It didn't make Izuku feel any better. He trudged home and treated his wounds with the first aid kit under the sink. He told his mother he had gone to visit Kachan for the past 2 nights, and his phone had died. Kachan would cover for him, even if they didn't have the best relationship. Izuku didn't touch his analysis notebook for another 10 months. He still refused to eat takoyaki. Aizawa, at this point, was half slumped in his seat.
You're both going to therapy. I'm assuming your parents don't have a clue about this?
Kachan shrugged.
It was easy enough to tell him we were camping in the woods or some bullshit. Everyone trusts the Golden Children. I can't believe you two were Golden Children. Problem children, more like.
Kachan grinned, cutting a sharp line across his face.
What can I say? We're just that good.
Izuku's answering smile wasn't huge, but it was sunnier than it had been since Kachan's kidnapping. A true hero experiences inconveniences and doesn't let it hold them back.
That is not what that saying means,
Aizawa commented.
A kidnapping is not an inconvenience. I don't know how to get it into your head that being kidnapped is not normal.
Izuku only shrugged. And that brings us to the end of this series. Okay, first of all, I love this series. It's great. But I especially love this concept. Like, seriously, it's just getting kidnapped all the time and just being so blasé about getting kidnapped is just so funny to me. Like, I legit, because I write fan fiction, you probably know that, like, the Drifting Through the Cosmos series that I have, which makes up, like, half of my videos that I post, is written by me. So I write fan fiction, but I have a series, and it's basically based around this because I loved it so much. I have 18,000 words written based off this, like, concept, and, like, one of them is, like, super inspired by this because it's, like, yeah, what happens after Bakugou gets kidnapped by the League, except in mine it's like it's Midoriya and Shinso who get kidnapped all the time, so it's a little bit different, but I love this so much that I just wrote my own version. This is so good. I love the concept, and this whole series as a whole, I just love every single one of them for a different reason. Like, they're all, like, one-shots, like, technically not connected in separate universes, but, like, I try to headcanon them all into one just in my brain. Like, it totally, this fic contradicts the last fic, because, like, Izuku was an informant, and that's how he got Kachan's location, and this one, they just have trackers because they're kidnap buddies, but I'm doing a lot of brain gymnastics to, like, fit this. Like, no, this is totally all canon, not just for this fic series, just, like, in general, this is headcanon for me now. Because all of these ideas are just so good, and then they're executed amazingly in this series. It really is great. So yeah, definitely, give some kudos to the author. Links always in the description. But yeah, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed. See you next time.
That's a